Committee, I am declaring that an emergency exists and I'm invoking the provisions of RSA 91A.2.3b. Federal, state, and local officials have determined that gatherings of 10 or more people pose a substantial risk to our community in its continuing efforts to combat the spread of COVID-19. In concurring with their determination, I also find that this meeting is imperative to the continued operation of town government and services which are vital to public safety and confidence during this emergency. As such, this meeting will be conducted without a quorum of this body physically present in the same location. At this time, I also welcome members of the public accessing this meeting remotely. Even though this meeting is being conducted in a unique manner under unusual circumstances, the usual rules of conduct and decorum apply. Let's start the meeting by taking a roll call attendance. When each member states their name, also please state whether there is anyone in the room with you. So Rob.
I am alone in my basement.
It sounds sad. Peter.
I'm here in my office, and even the dogs have deserted me.
Yeah, this is Chris Weeks. I'm here, and I am alone in an office at a school. All right, so the first item on our agenda, I see Jen is here. Jen, hi, how are you?
Hey, Jen.
Hi there.
Hey,
Good
Jen.
afternoon.
Yeah, good to see you. Thank you for coming. So the first item on our agenda, we'll start with you, and I think, Rob and Peter, you can jump in. We were just looking for an update on maintenance projects for the DPW, I think specifically related to buildings. I'm not interested in the road work or anything like that, but any facility related stuff like what you guys have been up to and what you're looking to do the rest of the year.
Sure. If you don't mind, I'll share my screen with you. I do keep an simple Excel spreadsheet that tracks everything. Hold on just a second. I don't know how visible that is for you. Is that?
It's plenty big for me.
Yeah,
I can read
it's
it.
fine.
Okay, good. So every year we do have a slate of projects that we try to accomplish under the maintenance projects list, which typically is in the order of $100,000. This is for all of our town facilities, so it doesn't go very far, and we have to be very careful how we select projects. We certainly select the projects that are the highest priority for safety and building condition. And so this year in 2021, we usually develop the list the year before, but we do have to do regular updates. So, we start the process in August as part of the budget process, but by this time of year, we usually will have had at least a couple of minor adjustments, and we continue to update as the season goes on. So this year, we have the renovation, and I apologize, this isn't showing you the whole. There we go. I have a quick, short abbreviation for every facility, but we have work going on in the Parks and Rec building on Court Street. We're doing some improvements to their second floor programming space, which is used for meetings. It's used for different classes and programs. And you may be familiar with the building. I'm not sure what buildings you have been through to have site visits and get familiar with, but it is an old school, very old school building. And it needed some major improvements to HVAC in these times, as much of our facilities do. It did need some repairs to ceiling tiles, painting, even the flooring, which was starting to lift up. So that work is ongoing. It's been going on for over a month. And it's not a huge lift. It will not be that total $20,000 estimate. But that was our estimate back in August of last year. And another major project that we have taken on is the replacement in Town Hall of the sewer line. It runs internal to the building. It runs along the corridor, which is behind the Finance Department and the Exeter Chamber of Commerce, and runs down to the area of the new public restrooms, and then exits the building there. And it's old cast iron. It's corroded. It's flaking off. We've had to route it 3 or 4 times in the last 12 months because of clogging, and it's time for replacement. And so we're going to be starting that work very shortly. I believe it may be next week or the week after, to replace that. It's not an easy job because we do have to, it's encased in concrete. It's the basement of Town Hall. So that will probably, yep.
Jen, what are the 2 estimated costs and the running total? I can make an assumption about what those are, but I'd rather have you explain what the 2 columns are.
Thanks for asking. So the estimated cost for each one of these lines is just that. It's what we've estimated that particular project to cost. And then the running total is just the addition going from each project to the next, so that when you get to the bottom of the red line, we're just under 100,000, which is our budget.
Yeah, so it's you're debiting what value is in there off of the budget. Okay, got
Correct.
it. Thank you.
And I thank you for asking the question, because it's just a little more orientation. You'll see that we have other projects that if something fell by the wayside, if we had to defer it, we couldn't get done this year. We have plenty of other things that need to be done that we could pull up into 2021 if we had to. Otherwise, they're planned for next year. So yeah, I think I pretty much covered the hallway sewer in the basement at Town Hall. And another project that we've been working on that's fairly far along is improving some of the security at the public safety complex in the entryway, where you see both the dispatch as you come in and the office area to the left. We have reinforced the walls with steel plates. We have replaced wood core doors with glass, with steel security doors, and that was important work to do in these times. And that I can tell you is actually over budget. The doors alone are very expensive. I'm sure you realize that. So, what we save on Parks and Rec winds up going to a project like that. But it's not orders of magnitude. It's just, it's probably another, I think I just saw a purchase order for the doors that was about $7,000 for those doors. Next, I'm sorry if there are questions.
Well, do you want us to wait? I'd be happy to wait until you're done to ask questions, or do you want us to ask them now as we go, Chris or Jen?
Whatever you prefer.
I have no preference.
Okay. I'll keep rolling.
Okay, let me ask.
It may.
Yeah, why don't you just keep rolling and then I'll come back.
Okay. Then TS is train station. We do need to replace the roof at the train station. It's in really poor condition. That work wouldn't be starting until almost the end of June. We have received a couple of pricing estimates to do that work. And I believe, that's estimated at $15,000. And we have more roof work here at Public Works, the administration building here. We have had some I don't want to call them minor leaks. No leak really is minor. We've had some leaks. They're fairly localized. We do need to address it. It's not a complete roof rehabilitation, but we do need to address those. And we have to make some improvements to our HVAC system here. This building here is almost 20 years old now. Not super old in the grand scheme of things, but you all appreciate these are areas that need to be addressed when they become issues. Town office, we also are needing to make some not improvements, but some repairs to the HVAC. It's primarily in the area of the second floor, the mezzanine, the Novak room area. And again, that's a highly populated building with a lot of heat generated through the IT department area too. So pretty important to keep that going. And I believe similarly, if that work didn't start this week, it's starting next. And that was approximately $10,000. And then we have here at Public Works, we need to do a topographic survey of the adjacent parcel, the 4.7 acre parcel, and a wetland survey to identify, if that site can be used. We anticipate that it can, but how extensively it can be included for any future work that would be done here at the Public Works garage area. This is kind of baseline information that needs to be collected. And I know that we didn't get support for doing the full $75,000 effort that we requested, but we figured this could at least continue to keep some momentum behind that and get some information that needs to be gathered. And then that work probably wouldn't start until June. And then the last that would be included in our 100,000 level of effort is the roof at the Swayze Park Pavilion. That roof is I don't want to call it cedar, but it's a wooden shake style roof that's in really poor condition for the short lifespan that it's had. So we are looking at replacing that with an asphalt shingle roof. It's just too expensive. The exposure there is high. I know it looks nice when it's new, but it's definitely not up to the standard. There are also some wooden beams that are pretty exposed to the elements that are rotting that need to be replaced. And so that's included here for approximately $4,000. It's a small building. I don't even what we'll call it the pavilion. It is what it is, but it's an important piece that's used by pretty much everybody that goes there for any kind of an event. It gets a lot of use. So those are the projects that we have proposed and are working on this year in the facilities line. Not to say that we don't have other small things that go on. I think you're all aware in our budget that each building does have a maintenance line item, but it typically is it's just the bare minimum that covers things like, replacement of a broken window pane, making, if there's a damage to carpeting that needs to be replaced. It's more the minor maintenance day to day to keep our town facilities in good condition. But these are where we get more substantial efforts accomplished. And that's pretty much the summary for this year.
So Jen, I have a question on the Swayze Parkway, the pavilion. How is that dovetailed with the parkway and that whole separation of the parkway? How is that handled?
So actually, that's a great question. The project cost is more than $4,000. The Swayze Parkway trustees did vote to support, I believe it was at $8,000. So the total cost is about $12,000. So yes, they are contributing to it, but they needed a little bit more. I don't remember what their total annual budget is, but it's not a whole lot more than that. And obviously they have to continue to get their, the mowing and any tree maintenance work done with that budget.
Great, thank you.
Jen, we did tour on the park. Let's start with the Parks and Recreation building. We did tour that, and we got a good sense of what kind of work needs to be done there. But we specifically asked them about this project, this $20,000, and they clearly stated to us that it was not their highest priority, and that their highest priority was to do some air cleaners dealing with the COVID issue, as well as associated costs with that. And so I guess I'm interested in how you decide to go ahead and do a project, even if it's not the top, and make it the top priority top priority on a list for the town, when the department chief and deputy chief don't think that's their highest priority for that particular building.
Well, there's kind of two questions, or maybe there's two answers embedded in there. One is we are acquiring air filtration units, portable air filtration units that are being deployed at different locations. And this is one of those areas. It's being done under a completely different part of the budget. So it's not taking away from the maintenance projects, because if you think about it, it's not really a maintenance issue. It's kind of it's really related to COVID specifically. And the town has received monies to be able to address some of those deficiencies. So that is being addressed. And it's not just Parks and Rec, but there are units that would go in Town Hall as reopening to the public at all of these facilities. You know, over the past year, they've essentially been shut down except for the employees and a little bit of the public. Town, obviously, town office does have people coming in, but the typical foot traffic has been much lower than normal. And town hall usage has been, nothing. And the same with Parks and Rec. We haven't been open for the public, but with that reopening to the public that is imminent, we needed to address those things. So does that help, Peter?
Well, I mean, it helps, Jen, on one level, but it doesn't help on the other. And that is, we specifically asked them about what was their top priority, and they didn't say anything at all about how this was going to be funded from somebody else. This was all in the discussion in the context of the maintenance budget. And they clearly said that this particular project was not their highest priority. Now, unfortunately, since I didn't know exactly what you guys were going to show us, I don't have my record in front of me, but I will tell you that they clearly said that wasn't it. So I guess that raises a question as to why, you would go forward with this project, even though it clearly wasn't their first one. Now, I understand the work at some point needs to be done. I'm not arguing that. But if the department head thinks that the priority should be elsewhere, and it was more than just COVID stuff, I think, and if it wasn't, I will stand corrected. It doesn't, there's obviously some kind of lag time between when you put it on the list and when you decide to do it. And I asked them specifically, were they consulted by DPW about this item being on the list? And they said no. So there's a disconnect here. So I don't know how you build a list, and maybe we ought to get into that at some point. But as far as Parks and Rec was concerned, they had no input into placing this one as your number one priority on the maintenance list for this fiscal year. So I think it's something that you're going to have to consider, whether just because it was on your top priority list at a point in time, obviously there's nothing sacred about the list. Otherwise, you wouldn't have made some of these other changes for other priorities that came up, or additional costs like the lobby security costs. But it suggests that you might want to consider, before you go off and obligating money, check back with the department to see whether they still want you to do it. On the lobby security,
Hey,
I
Peter,
didn't hear you, and I think you said
Hey,
it.
Peter,
What?
can I just make a quick comment? I wasn't there for the Parks and Rec
Yeah,
programming thing. Do you remember? I think it's important who gave us that information. I'm not sure if it was Greg or Melissa or who else.
it was Greg and Melissa.
Okay.
It was Greg and Melissa. Okay, so
Yeah.
we weren't just talking to other people who might not know. Greg and Melissa said neither one of them was consulted about this particular project being the top priority for the town maintenance budget.
Right. So just as a comment, I mean, I'm not sure, Jen, in general, whether you're under the impression that ultimately you're responsible for kind of the building envelope and making sure that the buildings are safe, secure, and that ultimately there may be some things that are over and above that are requests by each individual department head. So the department heads are not responsible for the buildings. They're just really responsible for their department and the internal workings. Is that kind of how you approach some of the maintenance items?
I would say that that's a fair representation. I mean, we do our best to confer with some of the building occupants. We don't necessarily, some of the buildings are fairly complex with a lot of occupants, and we are not gaining input from all of the occupants, but we do typically discuss these with individuals. I wasn't aware that we hadn't spoken with Parks and Rec earlier, but that was work that was needed. And we do, I would say for the most part, we are consulting. The lobby security is a perfect example of that. After reading the report from the police, I can't remember the name, but it came out about last year, this time, maybe June period of time. It became apparent that there needed to be some security improvements. And so we had consulted with the chief to see what he felt would be appropriate, considering that there's a lot going on in the next few years. We didn't want to make a major investment that if it wasn't going to be necessary, if there was going to be a move involved, but what would make sense for short-term implementation that would be an improvement. And so that's how we developed that. Did we do that with every single building? No, I have to say that we don't always get those people engaged. We could do a better job at that.
Jen, I apologize. I didn't hear you. Did you say that you did replace the glass in the lobby with these steel doors?
With the
or not?
doors. Yeah, just with the
So
doors.
So the glass, the non-bulletproof glass is still in there?
Correct.
Okay.
I don't really want to be advertising that.
Well, I believe it's in their report by the consultants, but I don't know that. I apologize. I guess then we'll have to take offline what you're going to do about that, and we'll just do that later, I guess. Let me ask you about the topo and wetland survey. there obviously were particular reasons, and those reasons have yet to be addressed as to why we didn't recommend the funding for the DPW garage next step. So I guess the question is, who gives you the authority if there's no money approved in the budget for the next year? Who gives you the authority to spend money for the first part of the work that would have been done with that other money? I mean, did you get a sign off from Russ or from Melissa that it was okay to go ahead with the topo and wetlands survey? Even though you would have probably done that with the money you might have gotten for next year if that warrant article was approved?
Yes, I did speak with Russ about this before we started it. This was a concerted effort. It wasn't just me to try and figure out how we can continue to get the information that's needed before we really can make informed decisions. So, yeah.
Okay, so Russ approved. Am I right, though, that this work would have been done in under the budget request for I can't even remember at this point how much it was, but it came down to $100,000 that was being discussed in front of the select board, and they said no to even that on our recommendation. But wouldn't that work have been done under that next year's budget request?
Yes, it
the
was
topo and wetlands.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so I guess that's then a discussion we have to have with Russ. The town hall work, I guess the maintenance list project that we got that Dave was good enough to send to us and Jeff was good enough to send to us listed other kinds of stuff to be done at the town hall. And obviously it was to the same amount of money, but it had nothing to do with the sewer. Yeah, there it is, I guess. How does the process work? I mean, this list, you give us this list, you give the budget committee this list, and then you work toward the list until something comes up. And so there's is it a regular, you review the list monthly, or is it only as things come in? Somebody calls you up and says, hey, we really have a bigger problem now. Can we use that money for this? I don't have a problem with any of these things being done, with the exception of the topo and wetlands. I have a serious issue with that. That's not between us. But it just shows that the first list doesn't seem to have the half-life of, I don't even know how long it is. Is this a typical year for churn in these kinds of lists, in this list? Is there more change this time or less than normal years?
I would say it may be a little bit more than normal years, but every year there is there has to be revisions.
Sure.
So it does vary. It does vary. But the frequency that we review it really depends on the needs as they arise. And usually it's Jeff who will identify a need and we'll discuss it. And then, depending on what we have already started, we have a conversation about, is there a way to accommodate the need? And then I will propose that to Russ. And, we're not doing this in a vacuum. We certainly involve others as needed. And, but no, it's not necessarily what we propose in August of the prior year. It's not always going to capture what the highest needs are. So I think it's reasonable to expect when we've only got this level of expenditure that we have to make sure that our priorities are reflecting what the current needs are.
And I believe that
For the most
ultimately
part,
this commentary is part of the genesis of why there was a facilities committee. And one of the recommendations from us is to develop the facilities conditions assessment, which would begin to build a more developed list and then could be prioritized. And the budget should match ultimately what's attainable in the year. So if $100,000 is not sufficient to maintain and keep our facilities up to date, then that's really that's part of the goal. So why I'd really like to shift the conversation really towards our goal, which has been the same thing for the last almost 2 years, which is the finding funding for the facilities conditions assessment so that we could actually have by building the documentation that shows the overall condition of building envelopes, mechanical systems, electrical systems, plumbing systems, and that we could use that as a way to guide us through. So very similar to what you have, Jen, on your, the sewage treatment plant. You have a, something that actually tracks all of the items that are in there. And I think that would be very helpful for everyone. And it would be less contentious because if it's already on the list and the time has come up and we evaluate it and it needs to be done and there's a cost associated with it, we move forward. So that's ultimately how we started. So the question is that where last time we discussed this, I think we discussed the idea of from what budget do we get the money, and it appeared to us that this had to be something we discussed with you, Jen, as far as putting the FAC onto your list for the 2021-22 budget cycle.
And, that's certainly one way to approach that. And actually, Dave and I were just having a very preliminary conversation about the CIP for next year. And that was one of the questions that we were discussing, if that should be a standalone request that goes into the CIP. My understanding, and I could be wrong, I have not kept up with all of your meetings, but that the RFP for the facilities condition assessment was anticipated to be anywhere from 75,000 to maybe even more over over a couple of years, but maybe 75 for 1 year. And as you can see, at our typical expenditure rate of 100,000, that would really challenge us. And so if we could get 175,000 and include that in there, that might be one way to approach it.
Sure. How we kind of ended up with that, Jen, was that we figured that about $25,000 to $30,000 we could actually initiate the process, and that we could, at a minimum, begin to build the database. We decided that we'd take a handful of what we call the critical facilities within the town, and then start with those to begin to build the database. And then in subsequent years, again, build additional information, but really focusing on, of what high use buildings, age, things like that, as part of our starting point. Is that what you guys, Peter, Chris, is that your recollection as well?
Yeah, we were thinking about breaking it up into 2 tranches, and I think, Jen, we were estimating the total cost to be $75,000. So, potentially maybe 30,000 1 year and 40,000 the next year. Yeah, I mean, it's become very clear that it's going to be a difficult slog to procure that kind of funding. So we might need to put our heads back together and come up with some additional justification for this. We need to make a better case for why this needs to be done and what are the financial benefits to the town. So I think we have a little more work to do on that on our end.
And just to let you know too, I mean, we don't disagree. I think you can see that most of our maintenance, whether it's water, sewer, sidewalks, roadway, we do take an asset management approach so that we can identify priorities that we can justify easily what the expenditures are needed, why they're needed, and we're making informed decisions, based on risk and need. That's how we like to do things. It makes it easier for everybody. So we have started some internal discussions about how we might be able to do not anything to the level of probably what you've been talking about, the facility condition assessment by a major AE type firm, but what might be available out there already for canned programs or approaches that might be a little more scalable to what we have to deal with here. We don't have any numbers yet. It's very preliminary conversation, but it is with a company, and we'd want to talk to more than just one, obviously, but it is with one company that does do facilities, multiple locational type facilities, not something as intense as a university campus or, but probably more on the scale of the town of Exeter. And, we have some great information that's already been generated through the townwide facilities report that was done back in 2015 that certainly could be incorporated too, that it doesn't all have to be redone. That's a good starting point, if you will. So we'll continue to do some investigation there and do our diligence and see what we might be able to come up with, not to necessarily say that's how we have to do it, but we understand that, yeah, there's some challenges with doing it. And what might maybe a more economical approach that might be scaled to us could be.
Yeah, I think I'm more along that line, Jen, myself. I think I've tried to shift the focus a little bit this year to being more what we can do. If we don't have an outside firm just do the FCA for us, how can we move this along on our own? I think that's where I'm going to, because the funding, for $75,000, and if we can't make a really good financial justification for it, then that's on us. And then we need to find a more cost-effective way of doing this and at least getting it started. So yeah, I agree. And who in your office is kind of reviewing those programs in terms of, the preventive maintenance or the facility conditions software that you're looking at, things like that? Who would that be?
It's both Jeff Beck, our maintenance superintendent, and Matt Berube, who's our water sewer manager, but has, been key in all of our asset management approaches. And, maybe he's not facilities centric, but that's what he does do. And certainly anything that we wind up utilizing for software needs to be something that he's going to support, because believe it or not, he's Atlas, or he's the wizard behind the curtain that makes it all integrate.
And so I'm going to put my 2 cents into this, is that like anything, garbage in, garbage out. So the reality is that the data that's put into these things has to be based upon some accuracy. And I think that's where having somebody else, third-party people who are able to really do the assessment of the conditions of specific systems and things like that is helpful to a town. It also brings other resources. I mean, towns already are stretched to the nth degree, and the reality is that to get something done and more expedited is to have somebody help out. Does it have to be, the 75 or 70? Maybe not, but I'm still an advocate of bringing on some assistance and some help in doing it.
I find you're going to love this, Jen. You know how loath I am to spend money without good hard data and justification for it. So I'm inclined to agree with both Chris and Rob, though, that we have to figure out what the right number is, and we have to have the best justification for it. And I agree with Rob about how we might need some outside help, but I definitely agree with Chris that if there's a way to obtain whatever is the best information the town already has, then that's a good start that we can start to deal with. And in that regard, Jen, is there for all of the major town buildings, and there are only 10 or I don't know, whatever you consider major, we've always, I think, thrown around some handful of number 15 as below that. Does each building have a list like the annual maintenance list? Is there a list for each building that says, major maintenance projects, either connected with a budget number or not a budget number, but a cost estimate or a timetable, like, okay, not this year, but next year? Is there any kind of list that each of the major departments that own the major facilities has put together and submitted to you guys so that you can in part use that information to build the overall maintenance list or not?
No, there is not. We have not requested that, and I think that's maybe an important approach that we could consider moving forward, that, we solicit that kind of input and information from the departments. The only thing that you have to be careful with that is once they've put in that request, there's an assumption that it is in the works or it's in the queue. And I think you all can appreciate that we can't accommodate all the requests. So there has to be some kind of a kind of realistic feedback that they
you're absolutely right. Yeah. And indeed, you're also going to get wish lists, and each department's going to have its own wish list. And then somebody above their pay grade has to try to reconcile that with a real budget as well as overall town priorities. But that having been said, I would urge you to consider that, and maybe it's a discussion we should have with Russ as well, that each of the departments with major buildings ought to be tasked with developing, consider it raw material, if you will. And you can label it preliminary, you can label it draft, you can label it whatever you want that shows it's not, no pun intended, it's not set in concrete and it may never happen. But if the people who own the buildings and who work in the buildings and who use the buildings can't give us some kind of reasonable idea what they think is needed, then they're not in the right jobs. And we can, and you, I know, can discount how much of it's salesmanship and how much of it's wish list. But it might be a way to start getting the information that ultimately we would want validated by the FCA, but in advance of the FCA, at least might give us some raw material to kind of look at. For whatever that's worth.
As long as we separate out what our programmatic wish lists, I'll use your terminology, Peter, from what are really the things that are needed to maintain operations of the facility, because that was our original goal, was to separate out what are, I need a new blank because I'm doing blank. We need to really focus on what's the condition of the roof, what's the condition of the envelope, what's the condition of the mechanical systems, electrical systems, plumbing systems. Are there any site considerations? Does it have an accessibility issues? Does it have code issues? I mean, these are the things that actually give us the tools, and anybody the tools, to be able to assess whether to reinvest in a facility is the right reinvestment. I think the Parks and Rec one is a good example. After walking through there, you go through the building and you look at the utilization, you look at what's in there. And if you had a complete assessment of it, you sit there and say, to bring this thing up to code and to bring it up to current standards, how much would we have to invest in that one little building? A lot of money. Is it the right investment?
I agree with you, Rob. That's exactly right. And maybe what we should do is and with your indulgence, Jen, maybe we should try to create a paragraph of criteria that, if it's agreeable to Jen and Russ, will form the basis of the tasking to the departments to get exactly that kind of information, not the programmatic stuff. And maybe that's, I don't know, I would suggest that would be helpful to us, but it would also be helpful to them if they're willing to go ahead and make those requests to the departments.
Yeah, I think that, sorry, I was gonna say, I think that there's an approach there that is needed. And again, I think as long as we can, somehow we have to put that in the environment of, even though the request, and maybe we don't put it as a request. I think that's important, that we differentiate between a request and, because we do have a work order request system. Let's say something needs immediate repair. That's a request. We do need to address it. And then more of, and Dave, maybe you can add some language here, but it's more of the planning aspect of, we can anticipate we're going to be adding a position in this department. We're going to need additional office space. We need to somehow change the configuration, or we need to gain this. And, it's one thing if it's planned, and we do have that component too, when we do a position request, it's supposed to be filled out whenever we go to fill a vacancy. It needs to identify, somebody's going to need an additional computer, or they're going to need additional workspace. But we need to know that in Public Works before it's even requested to fill, right? Because that needs to be part of our overall budget for maintenance items. So, for the most part, Exeter's a small enough organization, the town is a small enough organization that we typically do know what's going on in the other departments. We're part of the conversations with expanding operations or modifying locations and things of that nature. So we've been fortunate in that regard. But once in a while, we do get a surprise that we never heard about, and that does happen. And I think your idea, Peter, might help to identify some of that in advance.
Thanks. And, we don't have to tie anybody else up, but at some point, Chris, when we have a working section, we can perhaps, or maybe, we can, between now and the next meeting, if it has to take that long, draft up our list of what kind of information would be helpful to get from the departments that hopefully, would be helpful to the departments too. And then we can work it through Dave and Jen and Russ to actually make it a request they are comfortable of making to the departments.
Yeah, basically what you're saying, Peter, is what we need is the criteria that we would get from an FCA, such as building age, roof age, window age, things like that, HVAC. So I think to develop a list like that, it would be good to know what system it needs to go into, because that's the exact kind of data you would need to plug in to start developing these rating systems and building priority lists.
Right, and we may end up doing it in two phases. In other words, we don't want to. we don't want to have a request that's so detailed that it's going to, take the department heads or their principal maintenance point of contact so much time and effort that, it becomes a burden. So we may have to have the first tranche just looks at X number of criteria, and then later on we ask for the additional information. But that's something we can all talk about.
Yeah, we can talk about
without necessarily.
So what would your end goal, end use of this data be in the short term?
Well, the end goal would be for all of us, Russ, Dave, Jen, and us, to have an understanding of where the building users think they have the biggest ishes maintenance-wise. Whether it's a code thing, whether it's something else, whether it is indeed the HVAC system. I mean, again, we don't necessarily need to know at this point how old the HVAC system is. If the department head knows that it's older than heck and it's really problematic and they expect it to die in the next 3 years. So it's something we need to talk about that will give us raw information that we can use as a preliminary to the FCA, but it also means that it's information that we can look at whatever makes this $100,000 budget, how that relates to what the departments themselves think needs to be done. And then also relate that to how we're thinking about, in our own mind, what's a facilities policy.
Yeah,
that's
good.
I'm not smart enough to give you all those details.
Yeah, I know. This needs a lot of working out because I think, to me anyway, what you're describing is kind of the current process, is that the CIP or, the department heads will go to Jen, Dave, and Russ and say, this is our issues. And then, our intent with the FCA is to try to cut through some of that subjective stuff and say, well, this is a real need here. Right. I understand this might be a pain point for you, but we also have these other issues that really are pressing and need attention. So, yeah, I mean, that's something we need to think a lot about before we make a request for somebody to put some time in this. Okay. All right. Any other questions for Jen?
Nope.
Hey, Jen, can we get a copy of that?
Sure, I'll scan. I've got multiple years, which I'd rather not share, but I'll scan this most recent one and send that to you, Chris, and you can distribute it to the members.
Okay. Sure, that would be fine. Yeah.
Multiple years in the past or multiple years in the future?
It's not relevant. And it wasn't always me maintaining it, so I'd prefer just let's start with this and.
Great.
Yep.
And Dave provided you with an earlier edition of it, so you can kind of see how it does morph over 9 months. But
one last question, Jen, is I did see a line item on there for the ADA study, which is unknown at this point. So I think at this point, the town's intent would be to fund that from this $100,000 discretionary fund, at least I guess, pending the outcome and what type of projects would be recommended from it.
Right. In my thinking, and Dave and I only chatted briefly quite a while ago, is it's more for the building facilities needs. It's not necessarily for, street crossings or sidewalks and things like that.
Right.
It might be stairs approaching a building.
A ramp or something.
Yeah. I anticipate there are going to be some things that are identified that need to be made. And again, once they're identified, we have to work towards it. But there's also that transition plan that would be, we don't want to supersede that. The transition plan itself is a standalone that we have to work off of.
That information right there is a perfect thing to add to our list. Is that ultimately for every facility you'd have an accessibility line, and you would actually list the deficiency in that line.
and we haven't had a chance to discuss the ADA study, but I did look at one part of it that said that the town was dedicating specific funding to it. And I only went back a couple of 3 or 4 years, and there were lines in the budget, not every year, but kind of on a random basis. There was a $50,000 here or $25,000 there, and those aren't the right numbers, but the numbers moved around and they were labeled ADA, but I don't know whether or not those actually made it into the budget. They were part of the raw budget discussions before the select board, but I don't know if the select board ever approved that. Does the study show any past funding? I haven't had a chance to read the whole thing, but is there a budget line that we can see over the years that how much the town has spent each year from whatever, 0 to who knows what on ADA compliance?
I take it looks like Dave is frozen. Of course, at the right time. I don't think that we have a single point of information just about ADA. I could be wrong. It could be that in that study, Dave had been able to compile that and the consultant had taken it. But I can speak to, just over the years, we have done a fair amount. We've done, projects at town hall. We've done projects at town office, but there isn't like a annual amount that's consistent across the years. It really is very project specific, very and related to ADA. So, and we haven't always been successful. I know there's been discussion about access at town office and modifications to the ramp. And, there have been some fairly major changes considered there, or it just may be that the ramp needs to be repointed and repaired and make sure that the doorway is operable with the proper clearances, things like that. So, but we can't point to a single line item in the budget, at $20,000 per year, we address ADA. No, we haven't had that in the past.
I think that's about it. Jen, thank you for your time. If you want, you can drop off, and thank you very much.
Okay, well,
Thanks,
thank
Jen.
you. Good to see you all.
Yeah, good to see you too.
Thanks, Jen.
Yeah, bye-bye.
All right, so, there's Dave. Next item I had on the agenda was a public safety complex study update, which I am looking for a very brief update, as I am sick of talking about it, at least for this week. But just curious, Dave, if the RFQ, like what's your plan for posting that, and what's the schedule looking like for that?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear.
My computer just went blank, and I just got back on in time. Are you talking the public safety complex?
Yeah, I just wanted a very brief update on the RFQ and schedule for next step.
Happy to give it to you. I was going to give it to you anyway. We issued the RFP. I don't know when we did, but shortly thereafter, the last meeting. The last meeting.
Okay, good.
And already have gotten some interest, some contacts. Several people have contacted me asking for it, about it, sending emails of interest to the fire chief. So I would expect, hopefully sometimes a lot of interest doesn't relate into a lot of proposals, but there's definitely some interest.
Okay, good. What's the end date on that? Is it?
I think it's I want to say, geez, I don't have it in front of me. We gave it 30 days. So it's probably I think it's June 18th, Friday, June 18th at 2.
Okay.
Don't quote me on that, but
No,
it's right
okay.
on.
It's open for a few more weeks anyway.
Yeah, we give about a month. I give about a month, or if it's not quite a month, if I issue it on a Wednesday, I'll give it like a month and, a few days. So I always give it at least 30 days to get out there.
Sounds good. Any questions on that? Peter, Rob? Nope.
Not really.
Excellent. Okay, so let's move to
Let me just clear up one thing.
Sure.
Sorry. The consultant's report about the Public Safety Center does indeed provide some details that we didn't breach classified information by having our discussion about the security. No matter what any of us said, I just want to make sure that people understand that and don't think that the Facilities Committee was being imprudent in what they were talking about as far as the Public Safety Center. And that's all I'm going to say about it.
All right, next item I had on the list is review the debt service spreadsheet. It looks like Russ is here. Hi, Russ, how are you?
Hi, Chris. I'm good. How are you doing?
Good to see you.
Good. Same here.
So I briefly looked at the spreadsheet, but I didn't quite look at it long enough to understand it. So if you want to walk us through that real quickly.
Chris, did you send that out?
Maybe I didn't. I received it. I think Dave sent it to me, and then maybe I assumed it was going to all of us, but it didn't. So I will forward that to you.
Oh, I replied. I didn't reply to all. I thought.
Well,
I thought
check
I
it.
sent it to
I thought we did. Peter, have you seen that or no?
I'm a deer in the headlights. I need to go back and look at my inbox. I apologize. I think Dave sent it to all of us, but in truth, I didn't have a chance to look at it either.
Yeah, I've got it and I can share it real quick, I think. Share screen.
Yeah, I'm happy to walk through any piece you would like of it. It's our master workbook, basically, that we keep for debt service in the general fund, water fund, and sewer fund.
Yeah.
That's a pretty big, blown up version of it.
Okay. Okay, so
This goes beyond the CIP.
This is actually part of the CIP, and
So it's the stuff in the back.
these are the financial schedules that are part of it's in the back of the document.
Right.
What it shows is existing and proposed debt service over the 5-year period. So this has been updated, and just last month we were able to update it and include the Salem Street Utilities construction for the general fund. So that's been added to the general fund. And then down below, it has the proposed debt service. So basically this will show you, based upon the CIP programming and what has been put forward by departments, and also sort of an analysis that Dave and I do behind the scenes of when projects might be ready versus not ready, or do they need another year? Do they need 2 years? What is a realistic time window? We also talk to the departments and get their feedback as far as, when they can sequence projects. And then that becomes the proposed debt service schedule. And again, you can kind of see where the years are and where things fit in. And then what we look at are the proposed debt service along with the existing debt service, and we do a comparison. And the whole idea is that we try to use this to smooth out the amount of debt service that we have in the town, so we're not getting too far afield in any given year where we think the baseline should be. And right now, I think the debt service in the general fund is about 7% of budget. And so we try not to get too much beyond 10%. And we just use that as a measuring stick. But you can see some of the larger projects are in here that have been put forward by the departments in recent years. So that's general fund. And you can see the tax impacts too. We did update it to show the tax impact for a $300,000 home instead of a $275,000 home. So what you see, if you can scroll, Chris, to the right and get us to one of those out years, you can see that like in FY26, we have debt service already in the queue that is, I think it was $107 that it was baked into the tax rate already for FY26, $107. And then you get down to the proposed debt service. And if all those projects were approved, it would add another $269.63 to the debt service. So you'd end up paying $377 for a $300,000 homeowner. And that's the year that it shows it would go to 14% of budget if that were the case. So you can see where it grows here. And the reasons why, if you get up into the upper columns or the rows, you can see where the big ticket items are in those rows. You've got the community center, you've got the public works garage, and you've got the rec park athletic fields that are taking up a good amount of the bandwidth, and also the Portsmouth Ave reconstruction. So you see the public safety facility is still TBD because, again, we don't know what we're really dealing with there. And so we're going to have to plug that in at some point, but to do it right now really would be premature. And when we do, it's likely to be a 15-year bond minimum, might even be a 20-year bond, depending upon what the cost is.
So Russ, are these numbers developed in conjunction with the BRC because they have been working on their kind of capital project projections, I guess? Have they provided input on this?
Yeah, so I've had a meeting with Bob Kelly, the chair of the BRC, and also the chair of the select board to go through these numbers with them. I know there is a lot of interest on the BRC in trying to come up with a model, at least from Bob's point of view as chairman, to come up with a model that would show the tax impacts and the water sewer impacts in sort of a more holistic way. And so we're actually working through that right now. We developed a model for the water and sewer funds to show, for example, like $100,000 of debt service in the water fund equals $12.91 on an annual basis. And the same in the sewer fund, it's almost exact. 100,000 would equal $12.30 for a 10,000 gallon user per quarter on an annualized basis. So we're going to add that to the financial schedules over in the water fund and the sewer fund to try to give a sense financially of what those projects would carry. If in addition to that, $500,000 in debt service would be an annual impact of $64.56 in the water fund and $61.51 in the sewer fund. So add them together, it's $125. So we're going to make that part of the conversation for the water sewer funds to try to get it to a more rounded view of the different pieces of the puzzle, because there are different pieces of the puzzle.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I know they I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I was just saying, like, yeah, and I guess where we would fit into the puzzle would be, you know, as we come up with a way to prioritize and rate building needs, maybe we could provide input to help shape this list as well in terms of priorities and when they would go. So, Peter, go ahead.
Russ, the number for DPW that doesn't look like an updated number. From 2 points of view, it doesn't look like it's been updated for inflation. Has it?
That's just the construction number.
Yeah, but the question is that the updated construction number based on the slippage of the start to 2023? And is that the construction number based on the 15,000 square foot building that is something that seemed to go away by the end of the process and was replaced by a 40,000?
Just not to interrupt, but I used the latest number from the latest CIP. I haven't updated that
okay.
number.
Okay, great. Okay, that answers the question. Thanks.
You're welcome.
All right. No, this is really informative, very helpful. Does anybody else have any questions for this?
No, I think it's great.
Well,
Good tool.
yeah, it is excellent. It is excellent. I would say, Russ, and I guess we have to discuss when and how you do it. But if we already know that the number's out of date, based either on inflation or massive change in plans, when is it appropriate to put that in the table?
Well, it would be appropriate if we have a projection and we have a known inflationary factor that we would be relying on, and it had a basis to it, then we would add it into the projection. And I think where you're going is it's fair to say that construction cost of the DPW facility might be larger than what is in the CIP, the most recent CIP.
Yeah,
we don't actually know that yet, so it's hard to say. But that's a conversation that I think Dave and I will have with Jen again before the submittal's made for this year to see where they're falling. Unless she just gave you some tidbits of what that might look like prior to me coming on the call.
So just,
no,
I think Peter's on it. Just something which I think is something that we've struggled with a little bit, Russ, is we got a number in the CIP, we get the documentation and the plans, and we look at the two things and they don't match. So part of this is I think Peter's comment is to begin to have realistic budgets that actually reflect where we need to be, not where we'd like to be. Do you know what I mean? So the comparison between 16,000 square foot versus 40,000 square feet is significant difference. And when we're investing in A&E dollars and surveys and everything else, is that just making sure that we're aware that we're spending money on something that's considerably more than what is currently sitting in the budget.
Okay, I'm listening. I'm just taking that in.
All right, I think.
let me add to that. Let me add to that, Russ. Even if you think the 15,000 square foot building is a reasonable planning factor, the numbers in the CIP were not updated for inflation to reflect the slippage of at least 1 year in the beginning of construction from 22 to 23. And that's for the building. The fuel island had several years, more than 1 year, I think 2 or 3 years of inflation that was not factored in to that estimate that was in the CIP. And we made a point in our letters recommending that ultimately the project not be funded. We harped on, among other things, the fact that they hadn't even updated the numbers for inflation. And even though we harped on it throughout the process, nobody ever thought that they should do that. So at a minimum, before you even get to whether it's going to be a bigger building, the numbers in the CIP are out of date. So I would urge you to consider asking Jen to update the numbers for inflation for both the fuel island as well as the building. And that's before we get to the point of even dealing with the scope changes that seem to be swirling around.
Yes, and we can do that. That's a good observation. I had created a sheet last year and I looked at the inflation factors, but you're right, going another year and not adding that inflation factor, especially right now with construction costs, because that's another wild card we're dealing with. Everybody knows construction costs are out, they're really out of control. So estimating now is is a tricky business when you're creating a scope and an estimate on something. But the point's taken, understood.
Thanks. Can I ask one more question?
Keep it brief.
Or where did you want to go?
Yeah, keep it brief because I want to cover a couple more things before we adjourn at 5:30 sharp.
Okay. Russ, the select board, by a 5-0 vote, zeroed out putting any money in for the DPW garage. And so there's a goose egg in there. Part of the funding was to begin to get data about notional sites or the site. And there was topography and wetlands survey work that was supposed to be done in that money that was rejected by the select board by a 5-0 vote. Jen mentioned that she discussed with you whether it was okay to go ahead with, and in her words, to maintain momentum in the program, to spend a very small amount of money, I think it's $4,000, on topo and wetlands survey. And I guess I'd like to get an understanding of, and maybe we should do it offline, or maybe we should do it some other time. And tell me that, please. I don't want to do it now if it's going to be a long one. But if the select board rejected the money, why should she be spending any money for work that was rejected by the select board? And that's basically what's happened. She took money out of the maintenance budget that had been designated for other stuff to do the wetlands and topo surveys for the DPW complex when the money was completely eliminated.
Well, one thing, Peter, Peter, let me say one thing about that is what they voted down was the $100,000 for, and what we agreed with was that there wasn't enough clarification what the money was going to be spent for. So it wasn't that they rejected the survey per se. It was just that.
No, but they rejected all the money, which included the survey. They rejected all the money, which included the survey, Chris.
I understand.
And so regardless of whether it had been defined or not, the money, and Jen admitted that this money, this measly $4,000, was in that 100,000 or 150,000 request.
So Peter, can I ask?
When it's zeroed out,
how does this relate to the facilities committee? And I think this is really more of a question for the select board and for Russ. I don't think this is necessarily part of our review at this point of what they have in their budget to do for maintenance and things like that. So
it was our recommendation that carried the day with the select board to not spend any money for this work. And so when the town goes ahead and spends the money for this work, then we have to ask ourselves whether or not that recommendation has been contradicted.
I don't think it's that black and white. They spent a portion on it. They didn't spend money to cover all of the line items they were looking for.
And from a facility standpoint, it's a piece of town-owned property. The more that we know about that property actually gives us additional information to go into something like an FCA. You have an existing property. Now you understand the survey, you understand the wetlands, you understand its capability of supporting town-owned property. So to me, it's so it's an investment.
I'm not arguing that. I'm not arguing that the data isn't useful. I'm arguing that the process has been violated. And if we don't care about that, okay, I got that. I understand that. We can take a vote on whether or not we care about that later. But all I'm doing is raising the point that she's spending money on a project that we specifically said no money should be spent on. A small amount, I grant it. Useful data, I grant it. That's all.
All right, we'll move on. from that. Yeah, I mean, well, yeah, let's just move on to the next item.
Sure.
So the last two things to cover, we got to wrap up the Rains Farm, the discussion that was started at the last meeting. Looks like Amanda's here. Hi, Amanda.
Hi.
So the Rains Farm, I have talked to Kristen Murphy from the Rains Farm Committee today, and they are looking to submit their application for the LCHIP grant by June 11th. So the discussion that we started, that you folks had the last meeting, we didn't quite resolve in terms of, so they're looking for a letter of recommendation from us. And I think that would, from what I can understand, that would be a letter if we voted to approve recommending this project for the town and for the LCHIP grant. We would write a letter to the select board and we could copy the town and copy the Rains Farm Committee on it. And they could include that in their application. Is that a correct assumption from what everybody else understands what they're looking for?
That would be my assumption. Yep.
Okay. So I guess we only have a few minutes left. So is there any discussion as to, how do we feel in terms of recommending that project for approval? What are the pros? What are the cons? And then we can take a vote on it, on whether we will recommend it or not.
So as far as I'm concerned, I think the issue is it's a town-owned property. We have again, if we're not going to, we need to make sure it's stable. We need to make sure that the items that they discussed with us about making it weather tight, fixing the structural issues associated with the foundation. And I'm going to go back to our comments earlier, safety, building envelope, the items that actually keep and maintain that resource. And that LCHIP grant gives them other funding sources besides the town to support that facility. And that would be I would recommend it based upon that.
Yeah,
I would tend to.
I think Peter, did you say? I can't hear you.
Okay. I would tend to agree with Rob. I have one question though. I was on a site walk with the planning board and the conservation commission, and Bill Campbell from the conservation commission and I discussed Rains Farm, and I asked him if he could give me an idea or give us an idea of what they were actually going to do with Rains Farm, assuming that they got the building funded. And he said they were working on some kind of list, discussion, paragraph. I don't really know how detailed it was. And I told him, and he said it was going to be part of their submit for the CIP. And I told him it would be helpful from my point of view as an individual member of the committee, not for anybody else, that it would be really helpful to get that list, paragraph, you name it, that would give us some idea of what they would do with Rains Farm, as opposed to just the kind of overly general hand waving that we've heard so far. And he said he would try that. Now, when we talked about it, he was talking about that for later on, by the time they submit the CIP request. So I think that if everyone agrees, and you may not, I would recommend that we, in our letter that says we support the LCHIP grant or the farm or whatever we call it, that we ask them for that additional information. So we ultimately do get some idea of what we're going to get out of the $100,000, $200,000 of state and town money, beyond just feeling good about the asset. I mean, yeah, it's an asset, but if it's an asset, it needs to be used for something. So
It might be helpful
I would
to point
recommend
out
that our
that-
letter includes, I recommend our letter says something about that,
Russ is trying to
even
talk.
if it's just a request for information.
I was just going to say that Kristen Murphy is actually presenting this to the select board on Monday night. So she'll be talking about it. And the most recent estimates we have are 242,000 from the commission. So I know there's a letter that she's worked up that I have the benefit of having that talks about the property to some degree. So I think if it's something the committee wanted to chew on for a little bit and kind of wait and see how that goes, I don't think it's anything you need to act on right away unless you felt good about doing that. I mean, just wanted to bring that up.
Well, I felt like at the site visit, they did a pretty good job giving us a nice list. So I feel very confident with the list they gave us the night we went for the site visit in the rain. So I'm not going to, we have 4 minutes left. I'm not going to spout it all off, but they told us.
As a
Okay.
town-owned property too, I have some interest in preservation and conservation at a minimum. So even in that regard, keeping the building preserved and conserved, I think is a pretty worthwhile cause. And it does need some help. If it doesn't, then it's going to either cost more to fix down the road or it will have to come down. And I don't want that at all. So as far as, so I think what I'd like to do now is just have a vote on a letter of recommendation. We don't need to write it now, but we will need to pen it pretty soon. I would say like in a couple of weeks, it would be good to be able to forward it to them ahead of their June 11th submission. And hopefully it helps, and I don't know if it does. So I'd like to propose that we vote on a motion to write a letter of recommendation in support of the Rains Farm LCHIP application, and we will draft the letter subsequent of this meeting. We'll probably review it and approve it at the last meeting or at the next meeting that we have in early June. So
I'll second it.
second, okay. So let's go ahead and Rob, how do you vote?
Vote yes.
Yes to, okay. Peter,
Yes.
Amanda?
Yes.
Okay, and I'll vote yes too. Do we have anyone who wants to take a stab at the draft?
I'm comfortable trying it.
Okay, and if you want to wait till after the meeting, the select board, Russ, did you say Monday she's presenting it?
Monday night, yeah, Monday
Okay.
night.
I can attend that.
Yeah. Have you met Kristen yet? Do you know her?
Yes.
Okay. I had also talked to her, just to make sure that they had a good financial accounting of what the money was going to go for, which it sounds like they do. As part of their application grant, they require that. So I haven't seen like estimates for construction or anything like that, but I believe they do have it. And, we can write that in as a condition on the letter saying, provided that all of the documentation there for the work to be done is sufficient, then I'm okay recommending it. 1 minute left. So the last thing is minutes approval of the last meeting. Did anybody have any changes or any suggestions for the minutes? If not, we can, I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of the last meeting. Oh, and I do want to make the note that I think our new recorder, she did a great job. And I'm very excited to have that resource available to us. I'm very happy that all of us can participate fully in the meetings without being busy writing down everything that's going on. It's a difficult thing, and I like having everybody very present in the meeting and offering their opinions. So I'll make a motion to accept the minutes from the last meeting. Any second? Okay. Rob, how do you vote?
To approve.
Okay. Peter?
Yes.
Amanda?
I approve.
And I approve too. So with that, I will make one more motion to adjourn. Do we have a second on that? Rob?
Yes.
Yes. Peter?
Yes.
Amanda?
Yes. Thank you for
Okay.
letting me come late. Appreciate it.
Yes, no problem. Dave, Russ, thank you for coming.
Yes. Thank you.
And good night,
Thanks,
everyone.
thanks, guys.
Thanks,
Have a
Chris.
good evening, all.
Thanks, Peter.
Bye.
See ya.
Bye. See you. Thanks, everybody.